Cracking toast, Gromit.
I have to congratulate you with the great recognition your film has received from the Oscar nominations, BAFTA nominations, and so forth. But also, this movie made an incredible record on the BBC this past holiday season. If I'm not mistaken, I have it written down here. It was recognized as the most watched film broadcast on UK television in 25 years.
Or since records began.
Right. And I feel like when you talk about that, no one, especially kind of here like in the West, would ever assume that a stop motion animated film would hold such a record. So I kind of just want to ask you guys, how does it feel to have achieved this culture success back home?
Incredible. Yeah. I think we always regard ourselves as filmmakers, perhaps even more than animators. Right. But obviously the stop motion technique is important, very important. But it's just that culture, that it's, and Wallace and Gromit is like soaked into the culture.
Yeah. And one of the things that this film seems to have done is bring families together. The young like it, the old like it, and everybody in between. And that's kind of, for me, that's one of my proudest achievements for the film, is that people come together and watch it and have a collective viewing experience, which I think is getting harder to do these days, with lots of people having their own personal devices or screens in different rooms. And the film is actually, whether it's family or groups of friends, the feedback we're getting is that is a common theme. And so that makes me very proud that we can do that.
Nick, I have to ask you, because these are your babies. You've created these. Obviously, it was nearly a 16-year wait before we got Vengeance Most Fowl. Were you aware that this massive hunger was boiling up with audiences, that they were ready to see him again, in the making of this film?
I wasn't as aware as how it happened. It was something of a surprise, really. I was aware of how people keep coming up to me saying, "Oh, it was my childhood," and I didn't realise I was that old. But I always think that other films were made in the last 2, 3, 4 years, or 10 years max, kind of thing. But for it to have that, especially over here as well, not just in the UK. But the amount of people who seemed, the moment we launched, that we announced that Feathers McGraw was in this new movie, it was overwhelming, the feedback we got of people.
Kind of took us a bit by surprise, didn't it?
As if they were expecting it, and why so long? And we've been waiting. This is exactly what we've been waiting for.
Maybe we were naive just to think that it wasn't that important, but it really did seem to be more important than we'd sort of given it credit for, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought that up about, especially over here, because one of my favorite things about Wallace and Gromit in general is that their humor kind of transcends borders, so to speak, and Vengeance Most Fowl specifically has all these inside jokes, these gags, that are more kind of obvious if you're British or if you're in the know about British culture, but also at the same time, it's not alienating towards American audiences. So I kind of want to ask, how do you go about balancing that humor while making sure your international viewers are still in on the joke?
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of the British humour tends to be kind of quite self-deprecating, but using stuff that, like the car that Wallace and Gromit drive is not cool, and that kind of thing. But it's universal in a sense, because we kind of laugh at it as well, and it's by choosing something that's not cool makes it very cool, really, the kind of irony of it. And we elevate things that are just mundane, like vegetable growing or whatever it is, or an old jalopy car, and elevate it to Hollywood status in terms of the drama and the villainy of Feathers, etc.
And I think that we're very proud of our Britishness and the fact that we make films from our own collective experience, which means if we're going to be truthful, and best stories come from a point of truth, is that we kind of hold on to that Britishness proudly, and not waver from it. But I think that film language works across borders anyway. So regardless of whether we're making an animated film or if a film is made in a foreign language, you you still understand it. And I think making sure that the story we're telling and the film we're making is solid, together with our sort of trying to be confident about our Britishness, when all that comes together, it does, as you say, transcend borders, and that's, for us that's great, because in many ways we ignore the international audience, and in order to be that, we do get notes, don't we, about certain phrases which are so obscure or British that it makes it doesn't enhance the moment, it kind of gives it some confusion, and we do acknowledge those kind of things.
But there's a phrase that PC Macintosh says near the end of the film, which is a very flipping Nora, and and that's an old. People say that in the UK, and we got a note back one saying, "Who's this Nora?"
And why is she being flipped?
That's funny. On the topic, because obviously I'm not from the UK, I'm American, but I have to say, owning a Chicken Run on VHS alongside like Nightmare Before Christmas over here was really kind of like our generation's introduction to stop motion animation. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but ever since I've been on the internet, even people who don't know Wallace and Gromit, they know who Feathers McGraw is. It's really hard not to come across like memes or somehow this image of this little penguin with a rubber glove, especially when he's holding a gun. It's kind of hard to forget. It's hard to shake off. And I have to ask, were you guys aware that specifically Feathers was kind of like this online phenomenon, like worldwide, before embarking on this film?
Well, it kind of came as a surprise.
When
we announced that he was in the new one, and that he has this like cult. He's always had a kind of a niche like cult following around, especially in the UK. And I've had a lot of feedback from people in California and New York, but not this big, It's like everyone was like willing him to come back. And
I mean, that might be reflected in the fact that neither of us are particularly deep in the internet. So we, we might have just missed it. But
yes,
I think it is. It's absolutely amazing.
It's become iconic. And even last week, in the UK, that it was the most trending tattoo request to ask for in British tattoo parlors.
That's crazy. Well, over here, I've seen, again, even before I even saw, Were Rabbit, I knew who this guy was because, people were, he would be on shirts and it'd be kind of like a funny thing. I was like, what is that? And then it's kind of like a gateway into, the rest of the franchise. I think one of the funniest comments that went viral when this recent press tour is that people genuinely hate him because he's also a villain. Yes, that's right. And one of the funniest things you said, Nick, was they think he's evil, but he's only a 4-inch tall piece of plasticine, which I think is very hilarious, obviously. But specifically in terms of the filmmaking, you guys have also said that he's very meticulous to animate, especially when compared to the other characters. Can we talk about how different it is, to work on a scene with Feathers? And from my understanding, you guys also went through a very rigorous process to find the right eyeballs, if I'm not mistaken, the right size pins. Can you guys talk about that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, start with the eyeballs. Yeah. A part of making him Feathers is because he doesn't have a physical presence like Gromit does. He doesn't have shoulders. You can't really give him a screen presence in the same way that Gromit can. But his eyes are the thing that you clock. And so even from when you made them back on the wrong trousers, it was the same thing, wasn't it? So we needlework pins with the glass bead on the end, we'd buy thousands of them, and the model makers would go through, because they're not designed to be eyes, they're not necessarily spherical, so they would find ones that were properly round and were centered on the middle of the pin, and then they would find pairs that matched in size, and when they found such, they would be put to one side very carefully and they would become a set of Feathers eyes. And we only needed, I think, 20 or 30 pairs, but it took a long time to find them. but the glass gives a glint in the eye, and it's that glint in the eye which Dave Alexander, our director of photography, and his team worked really hard to make sure Feathers always has a highlight in his eyes, because when he doesn't, his face kind of switches off, and that was the beginning of really understanding how to maximise his screen presence. And I think that was the most important thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it requires from the animator. A lot of it was established in The Wrong Trousers, with Steve Box was the main animator on that, but in a way, because he has a much more of a longer role in this film, we had to even be more just kind of just stick with keeping him on track, so it was quite a discipline, and to keep that going just the way he moves and not be tempted to do too much with him. And the animators who worked on him were very meticulous animators, and it was
particular
all about,
type of animator.
Yeah, they are, and they volunteered, which is very brave, of how he just, it's less is more all the time.
Yeah, really.
It's just more about how he stops and the timing between when he turns in very nuanced and minimal ways, and that in itself gives him quite a strong screen presence, because it's the art of the minimal, really, and there are other cinematic elements that, like the music and the way he blinks and the lighting, as you said, gives him that real screen presence.
It really helps to keep him mysterious as well. And I think that's the thing, is by holding back, the audience sort of fill in, and I think that's one of his secret powers, really.
Yeah, and actually these are the actual puppets. So this is. Feathers was always that scale, he was always like, whatever that is, 4 or 5 inches high. Yeah.
Moving on to the other new member of the cast, Norbot, he does have a specific texture that makes him look more mechanical, looks more shiny. I'm kind of curious, what was it like working with this character, because they have to move different, they have a certain fluidity to them, they're doing all this crazy task, and compared to, like, let's say Wallace, where he has a whole set of different facial designs, different lips, different eyebrows. Norbot, he's just a face. He's just got a smiling face. Did that bring any challenges for you guys?
Yeah, plenty.
Yeah. I mean, early on we decided that he had to be something that Wallace has made. So the nature of the animation is reflected in that. In that we tested quite a lot at the beginning. That if he started to move too realistically or organically, we kept him very robotic and staccato in his moves.
He felt too much like a child if he was too human
and too sentient. Yeah.
And even to the point of not moving his eyeballs, so he moves rather than looking with his eyes. We make him move sort of from a rotate on his middle, so it feels mechanical from a very basic starting point, because that simplicity makes you feel like it's Wallace's interpretation of what a gnome would be, rather than a sort of more traditional version.
That's right. Yeah, and early on we decided not to give him the Wallace type mouth, organic, but a mechanical ventriloquist, where his jaw is on a hinge, so that he immediately started to lean into all those horror movies where there's like a smiling clown or a ventriloquist doll that's possessed or whatever,
Or Village of the Damned. That was quite a big reference.
Main influence, and the way he moves and turns very deliberately, a bit like Feathers. So they are the alter ego of Feathers after a while, aren't they, in the film?
I have to say, some of the funniest parts of this movie are when Feathers is commanding his league of Norbots, and they're all doing his bidding, and they're all moving in unison, they're doing all these crazy tasks. How many Norbot puppets total were made for this production, if there is such a number that you guys know? And also these sequences where I think about the little musical number, it's so hilarious. But also when they stick their feet under the truck and they're doing, can you talk about the meticulousness that comes with working with all these small gnomes at the same time?
I think it was about 50
altogether
that were made.
Physical, yeah.
But that was never enough.
Yeah.
So,
they were in demand on different sets at the same time.
And so Anne King, who was our lead model maker, she thought she'd sort of been very generous in proposing to make 50, and as it turned out, we probably could have done with 100. So we did end up having to duplicate them sometimes, do multiple passes in order to get the number of Norbots that we needed. The gag you referenced with them sort of powering the car underneath, that was one occasion where we used CG so the van is a stop motion van and the legs have been put in as CG animation. I think that is the only bit where we used a component of a character recreated in CG.
It was just more economic, wasn't it, than to be animated, to be animating legs running on that.
But other than that, when they come up out of the basement, those are all real Norbots, and we've used in those sequences. It's a mixture of the set being full, like a whole army of them, to a pair that then get duplicated, or physical multiple passes. So there was no one solution to how we could achieve the Norbot sequences. They all had their own challenges, and we pretty much used every trick in the book to make those sequences come together.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because both of you guys are essentially like stop motion veterans. Since you guys have been in this craft, so many advancements have come. There's different ways to not necessarily cut corners, but to make things more cost effective. But at the same time, Wallace and Gromit is known for its signature slapstick, for these crazy third acts that somehow get zanier. They involve all of these like almost Rube Goldbergian machinations that come together. So specifically the third act for this film, I don't know if you guys have seen people online, they've been comparing it because it's so similar to the third act of the last Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie, like in a good way though, because the stakes are high and it really does feel cinematic. So I'm kind of curious, because you guys have been in this industry for so long, does that become easier for you guys when you're pulling up such a big set piece? Are there still some like things that you guys are learning in order to pull off the cinematic skill of the film?
Well, it tends to be story comes first, and how funny is it, and what we want to do really. And
worry about how you do it later.
Then we answer all the questions about how to do it. And with the art department, Matt Perry, and digital, the guy who runs the whole digital department, Howard Jones. It becomes a big conundrum for everyone to work out.
Yeah. But the funny thing about you mentioning the Tom Cruise reference is that we just storyboarded that section, and this great thing of Gromit running up the boat and leaping, and then I went to see Mission Impossible. I was like, oh man, they've done that. So that's one of the times when we haven't. It's not a reference to. It's sort of the creative collective consciousness sort of happening at the same time. And
I've still never seen it.
Nick's still never seen it even. So sometimes we do pointedly reference a film we like, but that was one example where really honestly we'd come up with it and then I went to see it and it's like, oh god, they've done that same kind of, almost like to the frame set piece. So I mean,
it's funny, isn't it?
It's funny, but it works, and it's different in both films, but it's a nice it's nice that people are talking about it.
Yeah, most of the times when people say, oh, you've obviously cited this film and that, and we if it makes us look clever, then we
as they say, cinematic parallels, as they say online. I have to ask you, because that sequence ends with, of course, Feathers gets away. We see him wave goodbye as, they save the day. Do you, obviously, for years you talked about you don't like bringing back old characters. You always want to do something new. Was that intentional to leave the door open for Feathers, or? Okay.
I mean, he's somewhere in Yorkshire.
I mean, in the same way that he was in prison before and that didn't stop him. So why would being in the open, it's kind of, for evil mastermind like him, I think it doesn't matter where he is, he's unstoppable.
Right, and to kind of like bring us home, sort of wrap us up, I would be remiss not to bring this up, because riding off the coattails of this movie's success, we have had new announcements about Aardman in general, that Aardman has its hands on the Pingu IP, Pokemon IP. Like, truly, I feel like with this movie coming out, with all the great accolades that it's received, there can never be, I feel like there hasn't been a better time at Aardman than possibly right now. So what I wanted to ask you guys is, how important, because you guys have been there for so long, do you feel that there should be a balance of, obviously you could play with new IP like Pokemon or Pingu, but also you want to nurture the trademark home characters such as Wallace and Gromit. Do you see such like a balance happening in the future of Aardman?
Yeah. I mean, and we have, like, so we've got our evergreen, Shaun the Sheeps and Wallace and Gromits,
Right.
which we will continue to do in some form. But we are developing new IP all the time as well, as hard as it is to get new IP going.
And as well as working with third-party IPs like Pingu and Pokemon, it just makes for a healthy and strong ecosystem within the studio. And so as long as it's a harmonious balance and we can sort of keep our own identity strong at the same time, then there's why not?
Right. And final question. Obviously, this movie has been so greatly well received. Would you two foresee being like the legacy of these characters? Do you think we should wait another 15 to 16 years to see them again? Would you prefer that maybe they come back in a short and then we'll do a movie again? Or is that something you've really thought about right now?
Any of those could be true. But we need to have a lie down, I think, for probably about 6 months or a year. It's such a, these things are so demanding on your every part of you.
No promises.
Good question though.
But watch this space.